Yo, and welcome to the 150th episode of Lake of Rage, a Pokemon Trading Card Game Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Kevin Clementi, aka Mellow_Magikarp. I'm joined today by a very special temporary guest host joining me from the future. I'm recording on Sunday, but he is recording on Monday. We have Tim Franklin, all the way from Australia. Tim, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. All the way in the future, one day closer to the new set release over here. So yeah, I'm really excited.
I'd say that's not even fair, but like TCG Live is the same time for everyone, so I guess it is pretty fair, isn't it?
Same time, but I'll be opening my packs sooner than you will.
That's valid. I'm stuck at work when they open it at what 10 a.m. or whatever. It's not the best time in the world for me. But anyway, we have a very special episode for y'all. Twilight Masquerade is dropping. I already said it's Sunday for me, so it's dropping on PTCG Live in a few days. It's dropping officially in about 5 days from now, and then we're in the NAIC format from there. So I've invited Tim to join because I'm gonna gas you up a little bit first, and then I want you to list some of your accomplishments because I think you're one of the least known players for someone who has some ridiculous accomplishments, and it's because you're living in Australia, playing in Australia, where we seem to ignore it because there's no stream. So Tim, what are some of your accomplishments that you have in these past couple of years?
Yeah, maybe also lesser known because I haven't actually played for the longest. You say past couple years, but I did start in the past couple years. Started back in 2022, and I managed to win a regional in my first season. So Brisbane Regionals 2022, and then top 64 Worlds that same season. And my last couple regionals over in Australia here this season, I managed to get top 8. So back in Melbourne and Perth, it's back to backs.
That's pretty darn good, and it's one of those things where someone listening to this might be saying like, oh, is Australia real, right? You have these really small regionals. I think it's something that we always have to look and be like, there's a lot of really good players. Like the percent of high quality players at these regionals is intense. So you have been absolutely killing it. Are you in the round one buy race for Worlds this year, or are you kind of out of that?
Not quite the round one buy race. I haven't really been able to travel enough. And it is only the top 4 here, but I should be pretty locked for the top 8. So get a little bit of my trip paid.
Okay, that's pretty nice too, because actually Hawaii is one of the more accessible ones for you, isn't it? Or is that still like nothing's accessible for me?
Oh no, it's so much more accessible. Flights were under a K, so I'm pretty happy with that. Australian, so I don't know what that
Yeah.
is in the US.
I mean, there's definitely people who are in the US right now listening that are like, I couldn't get a flight for under $1,000 and I'm staying in the same country. So yeah, no, that's definitely not a bad flight at all. But anyway, let's go and jump into Twilight Masquerade because there is a lot to talk about. At least I think there's a lot of good cards in here. So Tim, I've invited you because you kind of buried the lead on this one. The first regional you won with was with Frostmoth box, correct?
It was the Frostmoth pile. Snom's my favorite Pokemon, so I got to bring it to the regional, right? Just to rock up. But yeah, that was right in the Lugia time, Silver Tempest. Some dark times for a lot of people having to play 30% of the meta's Lugia or something. But yeah, this was right at the start before things were fully kind of formed. Everyone was just running the same Lugia list that had just won at LAIC. Holes in the meta, and managed to win it all with Frostmoth.
So definitely someone who is pretty creative, right? And able to find, like you said, the hole in the meta, which was Lugia ran no switch at the time, or for the most part, right? It was actually really interesting because your regional happened the day before the regional I was at in Toronto, and it was suddenly everyone's like, all right, shove a bird keeper in there. Like we have to play one bird keeper if we're going to be doing this, right? And then, or was that not your regional? Was your regional the one of the ones after that, or was it that first?
It was
It
the
was
one that
okay.
was, I think, our day one finished, and it was only a 1 day regional, so I'd qualified for top 8. And then I think that was right before your list had to get locked in, so everyone was jamming Birdkeeper or Switch or something. There's like the Eldegoss loop too.
Yep.
People were scared.
Okay, that was the exact then. Yeah, because it was like you, and then there was like a Flaffy box that very clearly was trying to paralyze you, and you had the Articuno, of course. So yeah, that was definitely one of the really cool of like, oh no, like let's shove a bird keeper into our. I played Lugia at that regional as well, and at dinner with several other high profile Lugia players, and it was like we're running a bird keeper for sure.
Yep. And then everyone had to run Birdkeeper for the rest of the format, and I just ruined Lugia's consistency by a tiny bit.
I know to say, not the point of this conversation. There have been so many times, thanks to Snorlax, where it's like Man, I really wish Birdkeeper was still in this format. Like, it'd be so nice to have that draw 3 plus switch effect instead of having to run a switch. I don't know about you. You might be happy running Lost Box where you're like, no, I got plenty of switches. I'm fine.
Well, I mean, there's a new card in the new set that's almost like that.
Speaking of the new set, gosh, that was so good. It's like I paid you to do this. I don't even get paid, so you ain't getting nothing. What are some of the cards that interest you the most? I want you to start off, and then we can kind of go back and forth a little bit on some of the more interesting cards. But what has you like, yo, this is the card or the cards, if it's a whole archetype from Twilight Masquerade that you're excited for?
Oh, that I'm excited for. All right, the one I'm most excited for. We'll start with the big one, and possibly just the best card in the new set. Ursaluna EX. This card is actually just insane. It fits into so many different archetypes. It has crazy numbers, and the fact that it's fully colorless is, yeah, like I said, just goes into whatever archetype you want. Lugia, you chuck it in. Lost Box, obviously, those are probably the two big ones. But really, whatever you want to put it in. I've heard people talking about putting it into Dialga or anyone that just needs like a kind of end game attacker where it's hard to reset up your main guys. Such a crazy card.
I was actually not expecting us to agree like immediately on that number one card, but maybe they do. Maybe literally everyone is saying Blood Moon Ursaluna is the best card in the set as well. And it's hard to disagree, right? It's 260 HP basic, does 240 damage for potentially one energy card, right?
Potentially zero, right?
That's true. Yeah, they have one price card left. Actually, it could be zero energy card, 240 damage. This is a card that immediately reminds me of that Radiant Charizard, as I'm sure you as well, right? And we have Sharon's Care, we have Bravery Charm, we have Hero's Cape, we have DTE, where you can still swing for 220 pretty early. There's a lot with this card that is so exciting. My first, and I don't know how to do this, which means it probably is not real. My first thing is run it like Inteleon Zard way back in the day, right? Where you were just, all right, I'm going to just Charizard you, and then I'm going to Charizard again, and then a Charizard again. And Ursaluna's got the same vibe to it, right? Where, I don't know, something to it, right? So you can attack after they take two prizes, and then you can potentially Sharon's Carrot instead of getting the Rod and all that good stuff. I think this is a card that could be just recycled a couple times and do the thing. What else do you consider with this deck, this card as something moving forward?
I actually love that you said that because that deck was a lot of fun. The Inteleon Radzard. And that was like right before Worlds that year. I think it came out.
Yeah, it was like Roscothan at that Worlds made it a real deck. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, that was it. Yeah, I think also like you mentioned, it's like Radzard, but it's got this key part where it doesn't
Mhm.
say Radiant on it, so I can play Greninja as well. I can play other cards because there are so many decks where I'm like, I'd love to just chuck in a Radzard somewhere here, but I'm already playing Greninja, or I'm already playing kind of Greninja actually, but yeah, I've already got my Radiant slot taken up. I think Lugia is a really big one because right now, I think a big problem with the deck. Well, there's a lot of big problems with the deck.
Yes.
But you can't KO that Iron Hand. You can't hit above 220
Mhm.
without evolving. And obviously, they get the new energy and stuff now, which you can talk about later. But I think the fact that you can hit 240 in such a key number, especially for Iron Hands, without needing that Cincino, without needing to evolve for it, you just slam it down, attach some Archeops energy onto it, and take that KO so you don't just get completely snowballed. Really helps the deck survive, especially if Hands is going to be still around.
Yeah, it's just that like it's just so splashable as that option to do, like you said, KOing and Iron Hands, right? If you're Lugia, that can accelerate to it. One thing too is heard people talk about, all right, you can run Sablezard now, but with like you mentioned, Greninja, and then the Ursaluna is that late game attack. So you don't need fire energies anymore. You have Greninja, which is it turns out really good for Lost Zone decks. Is this something that you think we'll start to see of like kind of that Sablezard vibe, or does Jirachi kill that and you're like, well, you're just going to run the Ursaluna anyway, but you're going to run it with Iron Hands and whatever else people are going to run?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you'd want to fully put it into like that full Sablezard mode where you're kind of trying to loop the Ursaluna, but I think Lost Box as well, and again, kind of because of Iron Hands, but the numbers work out incredibly well where, say, they take two prizes with their Iron Hands, and now you slam down Ursaluna, it doesn't matter what energy's in your deck, you just gate, attach, three, and you just knock it out straight away. And they're going to have a really hard time responding to that because 260, it's a pretty big number. You've got your switches so that you can switch, retreat, and attack with it again, because it does have that same clause as Charizard, I'm pretty sure, where it can't attack twice in a row.
Correct.
Yeah, so it's really good for that as well. And right now, I think I've been playing a lot of Lost Box this format.
Mhm.
And I think one of the big problems is trying to find that way to KO hands or KO something like that. You know, you can play mini or glasses. You can play the Hooper EX. I think
Mhm.
one I've been really enjoying is Orangaroo V. Hits perfect numbers on Iron Hands. But yeah, I think
Uh,
Ursaluna just solves that in such a clean way.
can you remind me what Oranguru V does? The attack, the ability
I
is the
am
tool one, but
it is the tool one. I'm so upset you don't know. This is actually maybe my favorite card in the current format.
there's
So
no way
it's
that's true.
30. It's 30. It no, it actually I have played my last 4 cups. I've gotten first, second with Orangaroo V Lost Box. You will it is incredible.
Sure.
Um the attack is it's 30 plus 50 for each energy on the opponent's Pokemon. 230.
That is perfect math. Is it what, 3 colorless?
Yeah, 3 colorless.
Okay.
So similar to that Ursaluna, right? You
Mhm.
just slam down a gate, attach to it, you're happy.
Gosh, I refuse to believe Oranguru V is a good card.
It's
Another
an incredible card. Yeah.
I want to go with my number 2 then, and I want to hear your opinion on it because I know I'm wrong, but Iron Thorns EX is incredibly interesting to me. It has that initialize ability, so as long as in the active, no rule box Pokemon have abilities except other future Pokemon. Does 140 for Lightning colorless, which is kind of bad, but it does have the 230 HP that makes Iron Hand so scary, right? Because a lot of stuff is built to hit 220 or less. And this thing's like, oh, I'm going to survive that, right? And of course, you can use the best tool. I think it's one of the best tools in the history of the game if you kind of ignore the restriction, which is Muscle Band plus Floatstone, right? So Iron Thorns is incredibly interesting to me. I feel like it has something there. I don't think it's quad Iron Thorns. I want it to be quad Iron Thorns. But what do you think about Iron Thorns? How much copium am I on thinking that this is a very good card?
I think we're going to agree way more than you thought we would because
Okay.
maybe not my second top pick,
Mhm.
but I think this card is really good and the exact same thing where it's not quad Iron Thorns. That's not a real deck. That's it's funny. It's a funny deck. Know it saw success in Japan in that kind of format they have between the 2 sets that they
Mhm.
have. So before Dragapult came out, but when it came out, and it kind of makes sense there. You could almost get away with quad Iron Thorns. You're not getting away with that in NAIC. Please do not put more basics in your deck than just 4 Iron Thorns.
No, I'm going to say
But yeah, I think
please
it's
do
really good.
run quad Iron Thorns at NAIC.
Unless you're going to play Lugia, yeah, you probably do want to roll off against that. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting card. It kind of shuts down a fair few things. One of the big ones that sticks out is Lugia.
Mhm.
And I've even heard some Lugias leaning towards playing like a Flutter Mane or something to you jam it in the active. It's like, oh, finally, I can use my V Star. Unfortunately, it only shuts down rule boxes, the Iron Thorns, which you can't really shut down everything. That's way too much. That's like something from an old format.
I
But
wish.
yeah, I think the restriction of being the active is also a bit of a problem, given you can just gust around it. But I think I will not be surprised if that sees some kind of success in maybe a future deck or even just a tech in like potentially a control deck.
Mhm.
It does shut down both sides, I'm pretty sure.
It does.
Uh, but you just stick that in the active. You can stall some turns because Lugia is one of those big ones where it's how do you control this deck, right? So like a lot of people would just be like, I'll take the L. Snorlax control, you just take the L. A lot of they played like the Pidgeot control. They were playing like not Blissey, the other one. Was it
The
Clefable? I think.
Wigglytuff.
Wigglytuff, that's it. Yeah, they were playing like the Wigglytuff to tank the hits, or like Cloth. A lot of
Mhm.
really weird answers, where it's like it probably doesn't really work all the time. You're just coping a bit. Just take the L to the matchup. And I know a lot of control players that have just accepted it's like, oh, I'll just lose.
Yep.
But this could be something.
Yeah, I don't know. The one thing about it beating Lugia that I always come back to, like, well, maybe it's not that good, is like you said, Future Box, right? But the problem is Future Box already beats Lugia. You can play it in Miraidon, right? Because you have the lightning energies and you can search it out very easily. And that also kind of beats Lugia already. And so I want there to be something else for the Iron Thorns. Now, of course, there are other decks, right? Like you shove it in the active against Guardy, for example, and they do have to gust around it. Now, of course, they have Curly to draw cards and stuff like that, but you do shut off the Psychic Embrace, so you could potentially pull off a nice little Iono Iron Thorns in the active and buy a turn or two, so it can help that matchup. But again, If what works with the Iron Hands that already beats Guardy, right? Charizard is another big one where it's like, yeah, they can boss around it, but if they can't quick search, they're gonna struggle to find the boss, right? And you can't really go for the Arvin plus counter catcher plus candy plus like there's a lot of stuff they need, right? So there's just so much it shuts down, but I really want there to be something besides Future Box and Miraidon that it's good in. But maybe it doesn't have to be. Maybe that is really all that matters is those decks get a better Charizard and or Guardy matchup, right?
Yeah, I mean, it could just you just throw it in. Maybe it improves the matchup a bit. It can never hurt to have a better matchup. Guardian Charizard probably still going to be pretty popular decks
Mm-hmm.
going forward. Guardian in particular. One thing with Guardy though is they kind of already naturally play the Flutter Mane or Klefki or something like that.
True.
So they have a pretty reasonable out to it. But yeah, maybe you just throw it down, you Iono, and they don't draw out of it.
So that was my number two. Do you want to share another one of your just top, like this thing is interesting? It is fine if you don't have an order. I kind of don't have an order after number two, honestly.
Yeah, I don't really have a massive order, but I mean, since we just talked about the Iron Thorns, this is kind of in a similar line. But I think the Stone Ogerpon is going to
Ooh.
have a pretty interesting effect if it's popular in how other decks are built.
Mhm.
Like if you look at a Charizard deck right now, uh, what are you hitting with? You're not hitting anything. This Stone Ogerpon is just sitting in the way, and you're losing because
True.
you kind of already had a Alolan Vulpix in the current format, which there was that first Champions League of the format. I believe it came second.
Mhm.
Um, and the problem with that is one, you have to evolve, and two, because it's the effect of an attack, you have to obviously you have to get the attack off. But you can get gusted around. So if you're bench, you've got something on the bench. If you don't have exactly lone Alolan Vulpix, they'll just go like boss, prime catcher, counter catcher, counter catcher. I don't know. They'll do something, right?
Mhm.
And they can get rid of that effect, and they can just knock it out with their Charizard like normal. So you have to build this like heavy Churro Arceus deck to pick everything up and just have your Alolan Vulpix and then win. Don't Ogerpon, that's the ability. You just throw it in the active, two colorless and a fighting, start punching away. Charizard's never getting through you.
Mhm.
And they can't gust around it. Like they can gust around it, but at some point they're left with just an Ogerpon in the active that they can't kill. So it's gonna be really interesting to see if people will build their deck around that. Maybe that's a hole in the meta, right? If Charizard's popular enough.
There's also other decks there. It can definitely be viable, right? Now, of course, the decks I'm going to list are not necessarily the most meta, also, but something like Arceus decks in general, the only thing they do is hit you with a Giratina, right? But that suddenly becomes very hard when you KO their Arceus. They have to go into a Giratina, which is going to lost zone two energies. Or if there's a different version of Arceus that exists, they could also just have those other things that have an ability, right? So you can wall off something like that. Blissey is another good example. It's just, sure, weakness is cool, but like Blissey decks, the Blissey Monkey Dory deck, which I assume we will mention at some point here, they really don't have anything that can also hurt this. So there are other little decks that exist where it's like, well, this thing could come in handy, right? Qian Pao is another big one where they can Iron Hands you, I guess, but then you're OHKOing the Iron Hands in return, right? So if Qian Pao is still a deck,
Oh,
unless,
just one thing. It actually doesn't hit for weakness. It
oh, it
the
doesn't.
attack can't hit for weakness or resistance,
Oh,
but it
sick.
does have shred.
Okay, I did
Yeah.
not even realize
So
that.
yeah, you're not OHKOing the Iron Hands, but it's not OHKOing you. So you just punch it first. They punch you back. Maybe you bench another one. Who cares?
That's true.
I don't know how many Stone Ogerpon you want. But yeah, that you're right. Like Chen Pao as well. That's Blissey's got nothing. Chen Pao, they're attacking with just their Iron Hands. Maybe a Frigibacks for 50 if they're lucky.
Mhm.
They're not getting through that thing
Assuming no canceling cologne,
without
I
putting in other
guess
attackers.
some people still run the
That's a good
canceling
point.
cologne. Yeah, that gets like a, well, it depends if that's still a thing. But yeah, another deck that, you know what I mean, there's not a whole lot they have.
But I mean, the fact there's like enough cards where there's enough decks, right, where they have limited options at the very least.
Mhm.
Where maybe this is something you put into control, and they've used their resources or you've burned through their resources, and now you can stick this in the active, and they have no way to ever get through it.
Yeah, walls definitely seem like a more viable strategy, and that's one that we haven't had ever. Not ever, that's not true, but like I'm trying to think of post pandemic walls being just like, hey, I'm going to shove things at you that you can't get through, has been like, well, there's Mimikyu, and that's kind of been in and out of stuff, right? Or I guess Desi Goons was the one that was like during the pandemic existed, but just like this, hey, I'm going to shove different stuff at you, like this Ogre Pawn or the Iron Thorns or whatever, for whatever matchup I have to, and say, do you have an answer? And you don't, because why would you tech for Cornerstone Mask Ogre Pawn?
Exactly. Who's going to attack for it? There was also the Ice Cube Wash Energy was
Oh, yeah.
that was one when I was playing. That was A lot of fun. And you got mist energy too, actually. So you can mist energy this Ogerpon. So Roaring Moons aren't getting through it now. Or Roaring Moon gets through it anyway, but I'm sure there's something else that I wouldn't think of.
Oh yeah, no,
Um,
there's got to be yeah, there's it's a cool ability. It's like one of those things that like it should be on everyone's radar as existing, whether for your deck to improve, like you said, the Charizard matchup and a variety of other little things, or something where you're kind of like, there's very clearly a hole in the meta going into NAIC. Maybe I should be prepared for this because so far, Poke Twitter's been very bad at keeping secrets. But every once in a while, some group will come out with one of these things, right? We saw the Mawile at EUIC a few years ago, where everyone decided to leak it because you have to prove how smart you are, right? And suddenly people were prepared for the Mawile.
I played that Mawile. It won me a few games. People there was I played a game where got the Mawile. Sorry, no. Turn one, they researched away their penny as Lugia,
Mhm.
and I just ripped the Mawile, and he's like, "Oh my god." That was a lot of fun. But yeah, people don't keep the secrets, so I won't be surprised if something like this did get leaked or talked about a little bit too much.
Mhm.
But I'm just more interested in how other people are going to build their decks. Like a Charizard's going to start ruining their decks and throwing in a gouging fire because they're just terrified of losing to this funny card.
We've also seen like a lot more of them in Japanese lists than honestly I think should exist. But it's creeping its head over in the City League lists a little more than you might expect. So if you have not been looking at those, go take some looks and realize like, oh, this thing is showing up in decent numbers.
I've copied and pasted a few City League lists just to run some test hands, and I just start Stone Ogerpon. I'm like, why is this even here? What are you doing? But you're right. It's definitely in a lot of those lists for sure.
I want to go to another Ogre Pond next because we mentioned the walls, we mentioned the Mawile, and this is one that I think most people look at the second attack and say it's the best one, and you're probably right. But I'm very interested because of both attacks. And it's the Wellspring Ogerpon or the Water type Ogerpon. So it has Sob for a colorless, 20 damage during opponent's next turn. Pokemon can't retreat. The defending Pokemon can't retreat, and so a DTE is 0 damage as well. And then Water double colorless is 100 damage. If you shuffle 3 energy back, it does 120 to the bench as well. I think Lugia is the one everyone jumps to, right? Run Legacy Energy. You can do 100 plus 120 snipe, which is really good. And you get your Legacy Energy back in the deck, and that's really cool. But I'm just like, it's terrifying to me because it also has Tempting Trap on the card. And the fact that it's like, all right, Lugia's like, all right, I'm going to play something that makes you bench Manaphy. And you have to have a way to retreat that Manaphy or Turo that Manaphy, or else you're going to lose to that too. What are your thoughts on Wellspring Ogerpon?
I love when they put those kind of like almost like a spare attack. Like it's the afterthought, right? You know, look at this card. The big one is it's like got that snipe. That's incredible. And they just throw in this little thing, and there's going to be situations where someone who's got really good awareness of it is going to pick that up and be like, actually, this has suddenly become a win con where normally my deck would never care about this. But you're right, Lugia, they already run DTE,
Mhm.
they've already got it. Oh, I've checked your discard, you've gotten rid of your Turo, you've gotten rid of your Prime Catcher or something. Great, I'm just going to win the game. So I think that's really interesting. One thing that's slightly weaker about it, I suppose, compared to something like a Radiant Greninja, which is worth thinking about, is that it does have to hit the active always. So if you're a Charizard player, you've put down your 2 Charmanders on bench, and you've got a whatever in the active, at least those Charmanders are probably safe. Unlike a Greninja, where you really do need to bench that Manaphy. So if you've got a Rotom in the active or something that's not going to die to the that half of the attack, you don't have to be as stressed. But I think the card is still incredible. And the fact that it shovels back into deck is really important for Lugia for a card we haven't talked about yet, but is going to be pretty impactful too.
I do think there's something that I haven't heard people talk about, and I think Lugia players will figure it out, and it's not going to be a big deal. But when you do shuffle those energy back, which, like you said, is generally a positive thing, you do need to load energies on other attackers because, for the most part, if I see someone do that, it's like, all right, I'm going to go chase one of these Archeops if you haven't prepped some of those energies in advance, right? So, like, it is a benefit, but it is also something that Lugia players, you do have to think occasionally, and that's one of those things you do have to think about.
Just occasionally. I know that was a big part of the of Lugia back in the dark times of Silver Tempest though, is you want to use that Luminion, you want to get it off the bench. But if I load that up, yeah, now there's 3 less energy on board, 2 less energy on board. Get rid of that Archeops. Now you're just kind of struggling to keep your head above water.
Yeah, that was always the Lugia Mirror was interesting when both sides drew well, but not flawlessly, and that's one of the reasons why, right? You're like, all right, I have to Luminion because you have to Luminion. Like, or I have to get up, get rid of my Luminion so I don't just lose the game. But then also I have to prep a board so I don't just lose the game to a boss on Archeops after that, or a boss to something else, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's definitely something to be people will have to figure out themselves, and I'm sure they will after they actually play the deck more than once or twice. But yeah, you can really capitalize on them getting greedy and going for that big play where they get the snipe with Ogre.
Do we need to mention at all Hearthflame Mask Ogre the fire type? Is there anything here that you see? Because I don't, but I'd love to be proven wrong.
Well, the second attack is really annoying. That's the one where it's like 280 on an evolution, but it's 3 fire, which is really hard to hit. Like, I don't know. I don't want to be attaching 3 fire energy unless you put it in Zard, but I don't think Zard cares about hitting. I guess you could hit 280 into like a Tina or something. It's like an early way to get the damage.
True.
Maybe. I think the first attack actually has something going for it.
Okay.
And look, maybe it's not the best user of it. There might be a better user, but there's that we haven't talked about it either. The survival casket, whatever it is, where
Yeah.
it's you can't get knocked out. You just go down to 10 HP. Now for 3 energy, you're doing 400. That's all right. I don't think it's going to be super relevant, but there is another thing where I believe it's got 200 HP, 210 HP,
210.
and I'm not the biggest fan of this Ogre deck. This whole like 4 Ogre EX. But there is a pretty important card in the meta that is going to be hitting for 200 damage and has a lot of HP itself. But you're going to be left on 10 HP. And if you just attach 3 energy onto it or something like that, that's a pretty nice way to deal with it.
That is a pretty good. Of course, we haven't mentioned Dragapult. I assume someone is yelling. Someone has already yelled at their headphones, and at least one person has tuned out because we're 25 minutes in without mentioning Dragapult EX. But that is a good one, right? Like before you have damage on the bench, so you can do the rating Alakazam, or people cut the rating Alakazam and they end up running something else or whatever people do these days, right? That is definitely a cool thing when you have the most hyped card. Can't actually OHKO this thing based off of current lists that we've seen at least. And then you have the revenge, get your 2 prizes. And as a basic, that's a good trade. Trading 2 for 2 is very good when you don't have to evolve.
I would be very happy about that trade. But overall, yeah, that Hearthflame Ogre it's not much of a card. I wouldn't be buying any.
I actually don't think I had any on my pre-order. Now that you mention it, I just I picked up my pre-order earlier today and was like, sitting there watching them get out all the cards, and I was like, why did I get 2 Macargo EX? And you know what? We're not going to talk about Macargo EX. It's bad. But I didn't even get one of the Hearthflame Ogre Pawns.
That says a lot when you've bought Macargo EX over some other cards that might actually be played.
So Twilight Masquerade is just about to drop, and we've got some exciting news. TabletopVillage.com is now giving 10% off your pre-order of singles, packs, boxes, ETBs, etc. with the code MELLOW5. So if you go to TabletopVillage.com, you can order any cards from the set. And if you're like, Mellow, there's no way they have every single card. As of recording, yes, they do, because they open cases upon cases upon cases. You can order them at tabletopvillage.com, get 10% off with the code MELLOW5. I know you're like, wait, isn't that a 5% off code? No, for this set with the NAIC hype, it is now a 10% off code. You can do a local pickup, you can do pickup at LA regionals, and you can do pickup at NAIC, or you can ship them to your house for, of course, a small shipping fee. If you want to avoid that shipping fee, do pickup. You're totally good. But yes, if you go earlier rather than later at the time of the episode dropping, you can get anything you need. You can get your unfair stamps, you can get your Dragapult, you can get whatever at tabletopvillage.com. Use code MELLOW5 for now 10% off for this limited time. So be sure to get in on that ASAP for 10% off. Anyway, let's go ahead and get back to the show. Anyway, there's one more Ogre Pawn, and this one has been, I think this one I've seen the most interesting stuff with, and that's the Teal Mask Ogre Pawn. So once during your turn, you may attach a basic grass energy from your hand to this Pokemon. If you do, draw a card, and then the attack, honestly, the attack sucks. You want it for the ability. Do you think the Teal Mask Ogre Pawn with that energy acceleration plus a little bit of draw is something that should be seeing some amount of play, or is this just the occasional City League random spike of a deck?
No, this is going to be some of the most fun that I've had with my testing so far. I don't know if it's the best or if it's actually going to be any good, but it is so much fun. With I tried a bit of the Raging Bolt. It's a little bit too linear, but this with something like a Regidrago, or even there's the Toadscroll EX, which is I guess another card, not from the new set, but it does kind of work with that. But mainly the Regidrago, you get a lot of flexibility, and it is it is incredibly fun to just rip through your whole deck. You got 4 Ogre-Pawns, you just attach, draw 4, energy switches. You get to make a lot of actions, you get to do a lot. It's really fun.
So, of course, talking about the Regidrago V Star, correct?
Yes, yes.
Can you sell me on that being a real deck moving forward? Because I've seen it on some Japanese tier lists. Does this thing really make it playable?
I think it actually does. So you, with the V Star as well, right? You can essentially reuse one of those energy switches. So you load up your energy on the board,
Mhm.
use one energy switch, you rip the V Star. Now you can grab that back from the discard, use your other energy switch. So it's not actually that hard to find it,
Mhm.
and that's in like the worst case where you really need to. And then you can start attacking with Dragapult, which is this like it's like this all right card from the new set. I'm not sure if you've read that one, but you can use that attack. And in my testing so far, I've found more consistency doing that than actually using Dragapult.
So the real answer to using Dragapult is using it as a stage 1 instead of a stage 2.
Exactly.
And of course, you do have other cool stuff in there that, like, you have the Gudra, the Giratina, just to smack stuff really hard. I assume, is there other stuff I'm missing? Because I know there is.
There's the Noivern. So the Noivern's got, I think it's 70 and you can't be damaged by basics,
Mhm.
or 140 and they can't play special energies or stadiums, which has some interesting implications.
That is okay. That's pretty solid.
Oh, and the Raging Bolt. You can play the Raging Bolt too and hit whatever numbers you want. So you can just be that Raging Bolt deck if you want to.
Okay, so instead of the linearity of the Raging Bolt deck, because that's the reason I'm so uninterested in these discard energy Unga Boonga decks. But if you can do that plus whatever else you're doing, okay, you're selling me on the Regidrago as a real deck now.
It's a lot of fun, at least. I'll give you that. Give it at least give it a go to have fun. But whether or not it's real, I'll get back to you on that one.
So we mentioned Dragapult. We mentioned Dragapult a lot. We have to mention Dragapult EX from the new set, 200 damage plus 6 damage counters in any way you like. And of course, the Dracloak, we have to mention that too, has Airmail reprint. And Tim, for you, Airmail is look at the top 2 cards, put one in your hand and one on the bottom of your deck. Dragapult. Before we started, you had a hot take on Dragapult EX. So I want you to let us know, what do you feel about Dragapult EX beyond Regidrago fodder?
I mean, look, I think it was made for Regidrago fodder, to be honest. Look, I think the card is good. You know, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't good. It's good. It's going to be popular. People are going to play it. People are going to do well with it. But I don't think it's quite as good as everyone is overreacting to. And obviously, you had those initial City League numbers where it was like 25, maybe almost 30% of the City Leagues. You know, it was winning all of them. But I think part of that is just it's the new card, right? People want to play that. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
and that's their League Cups. So you want to rock up to those. And I want to play the new cards. I don't want to just play Charizard again. Um, and then you saw that again with the Champions League, right? Like, yes, it was very popular, but it wasn't winning. It didn't win.
Mm-hmm.
You know, fair few in the top 16, but nowhere near the numbers of what people were kind of scared of, where it's going to be like this Lugia V Star of Silver Tempest again. So I think it's good. I don't think it's going to be incredible, and I don't think it's going to win NAIC, to be honest.
So what have you found with Dragapult EX, the deck? Because one of the things that I've run into with, this is the only deck that I have run test hands with. One of the things that I've run into is it is slow as molasses. Like even Charizard is always hitting the turn 2 180 and you're like, well, 180 is not that good, right? But I'm doing it. I'm constantly getting the thing going and I'm hitting stuff and I'm making plays, and Dragapult feels like if I'm hitting a turn 3 attack, I'm kind of living a good life here, and then I don't have the late game sweeping capability. So have you found the same thing, or am I just like on my own island of mediocrity of Dragapult?
No, absolutely. I've found it really hard. Like, you just don't expect that turn 2 attack is not a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
You're not getting that. Your turn 2 attack is, if you're lucky, you're doing 70, and then maybe you spread that around with an Alakazam later, and you're happy with that. I am pumping my fist if I'm getting that 70 damage on turn 2. Because, you know, it's just one colorless energy.
Yeah.
I think the other problem is you're really reliant on like some kind of energy acceleration, because it doesn't have it built in like Charizard did. So you need a Xatu, or I've seen people run it with Charizard EX. I don't think that's the best use of it, but you know, some people have used it just for energy acceleration to get that fire on. I think, yeah, it's just you can get run over so quickly too, right? If they boss down your thing that you hand attached to,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't have your energy acceleration set up, you're not attacking the next turn. And what if they just boss you again? What if they do something like that? You just run out of attackers. So I think that's kind of a big problem I found as well. Yeah, like you said, that turn 3 attack is really where the sweet spot is of what you're realistically going to be getting.
And unlike for anyone who's listening to this too and is like, well, Guardy did that. True. But Guardy could OHKO absolutely everything. And this one is very weak to Professor's Turo, which I think should be fairly popular moving forward as long as we see, what's it called, Lugia with the Ogre Pawn, right? That's one of the things that I mentioned earlier of like, I think the corner attacks or Sob is pretty darn good. And, you know, you start working on something, you Turo it up, and then you're like, well, okay, my 260 damage attack is now a 60 damage attack or something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or you could just make the deck even more bricky and put in the new Milo tick that doesn't let them use Turo. I don't think that card's that good. But side note, that is they could play that. Who's stopping them?
That's one of those cards that like we really wish we had it at some point in the format, and this is not that point, like at all.
Yeah, that time's passed. But yeah, it's just really hard. I've really struggled to get that attack that quickly. Maybe someone's going to crack it for NAIC and they'll have this super consistent list that's just always getting it. But the other problem as well, you don't really want to, be candying like you are with Zard because that stage 1, like you mentioned, it's really good.
Mhm.
Airmail, like it's like I didn't play with Airmail obviously, but I look at it, I'm like, oh, flower selecting without consequences. This is great.
This is one of those cards that like I don't think I will be putting the time into because my initial attempt of net deck and see how it feels has been bad. But I will also say, if someone who I trust hands me a list and is like, no, trust me, I will play it in a heartbeat. Because in theory, 200 plus 6 spread is very, very, very good.
Yep, it sure is. That's I think another thing with Dragapult, right? That's going to change how other people build their decks. Like
Mhm.
every other deck is built different now. I've seen like the Lugia lists are cutting their 60 HP Mincino with the good attack, Call for Family, which you are craving for consistency with Lugia. And they're cutting it because that thing's just going to get killed by Dragapult and they'll lose the game on the spot. They need to play the 70 HP one now. People are playing 70 HP Fridge, 70 HP Bidoof, all these bad cards. But that 10 HP is just so important to them because of this like huge part of the meta, or like expectedly huge part of the meta. And I think that's going to have another massive impact. Like every deck that has a 70 HP basic is going to have to kind of pivot over to that.
Off the Dragapult hype, there's also the Monkey Dory, which we saw in the Champions League get second place in Gardevoir. We also saw in the Blissey deck, and that gained a ton of hype, the Monkey Dory Blissey. So if it has a dark energy attached to it, you can move up to 3 damage counters from one of your Pokemon to one of your opponent's Pokemon, which is a kind of an absolutely nutty ability, which is why it's so awkward of a cost, right? Needing a dark energy on a psychic type Pokemon. Is Monkey Dory something that we've seen see success in Japan because of the Dragapult hype? Or do you think this is something that's like an actual real tech that decks are going to be using beyond Dragapult?
So I think potentially for some decks, like for example the Blissey, which feels like it was made purely just to farm Dragapults and do not much else. The Monkey Dory in that, yeah, obviously that one's kind of reliant on the Dragapult damage. That's what you're spreading back to them.
Mhm.
Uh, And I think Monkey Dory kind of relies on it needs to be put in a specific deck that doesn't rely on their hand attach really. So something like that Blissey where they can swap energy. So you can put it on the Blissey, you can put it on the Monkey Dory, sorry, and then use Blissey's ability to swap it over to that, and you don't really lose any tempo from it. Or the big one Guardy, which I don't even think it relies on Dragapult to be good. I think this card, if it was in this current format without Dragapult, you would still be playing Monkey Dory and Blissey. It just fits so perfectly, and it does incredible things to the Drifloon numbers. You're hitting 330 or 360 now,
Mhm.
just easily. Um, no stress there. You're putting your own damage on. You don't care about hand attaching with Guardy. You got an ability that does that for you. And you got Earthen Vessels to find it easily. You're already playing your Arvens or Iridas in the case of the one from Champions League. You're finding your item, you find the vessel, you grab your dark, and you just slam it down with your hand attached that you weren't using anyway. So I think it would absolutely fit in Guardy, regardless of how good Dracopult is. I'm not too sure about what other decks it's kind of popping up in, but something I've thought about, which I haven't really had too much time to test yet, is there's other things that self-damage. Magma Basin is right there. You move that 20, you just got a plus 20 damage mod for everything you want, right?
Mhm.
Uh, so I'm sure there's other decks you could pop it into as well. But I think other than Guardy, most of it is kind of reliant on being that Dragapult counter.
Yeah, you mentioned that one, and that's something that I've thought of before too. I've zero actual list or anything with, but it's something like a oh my gosh, Gouging Fire type deck, or potentially a Valiant Entei or something like that, right? Where you are want a magma base in every single turn, and then getting back to being a giant HP Pokemon. Because both like Entei and Gouging Fire, I think they were made with the HP in mind that you were going to magma base into it, but now you're back to being a 230 HP basic, and you're getting, like you said, the plus damage. So that's definitely something that I don't know if that would work, but it is intriguing at the very least, right?
It's there and it's worth thinking about for sure.
What's another Pokemon that you have on your radar before we get into some trainers? Because I know there's stuff, I just cannot think of what else we should get into.
Let me have a look. We haven't talked about the Diplin yet, or that whole package.
Oh my gosh,
right?
yeah.
That's like a whole deck in itself.
Yeah, Thwacky,
The
Diplin, Goldeen.
festival fellas.
Yeah. What do you think? Is this going to be a real deck? Is this we're supposed to have a third person on today who was supposed to hype this deck up immensely. So maybe that one again in the future. But Tim, what do you think about this? Is this a real deck, or is this the hey, this deck is a really fun pre-release kit?
Well, now that we don't have anyone here to hype it up, I can just completely talk bad things about this deck without
Please.
anyone to counteract it. I think this deck is not that great. United Wing's a lot of fun. Shkamansky played it to NAIC last year. He had fun.
Did better
Did all
than
right.
me too. Yeah,
Maybe someone will do that this time. Look, I think it's interesting, right? There's potential. I don't think the Diplin attacking package, where it's what is it? It gets like 20 for each of your bench, and then do you want to go fully through what the actual festival fellas are? I don't know if we've
Oh, got you. So,
yeah.
do the wave is 20 for each of our benched Pokemon. So Diplin does about 100 damage, or maximum 100 damage, and can attack twice. And then
Yeah, it can attack twice with the ability when you have the bad stadium in play.
Yes. And then the other one that matters kind of is the Goldeen, which is for a double colorless. Flip a coin. If heads, discard an energy from your opponent's active, so you can Crushing Hammer twice per turn.
That's the one that I think might actually be playable though. The Goldeen.
Yeah.
You make some kind of control deck out of that. You've got all your Grookis on the bench. That's like or not Grookey. It's Thwacky.
Thwacky, yeah.
Yeah, you got all your Thwackies on the bench. It's like you have 4 Pidgeot EXs in current control, right? But they're not even 2 prizes. So you got all of them. You got your Goldeen in the active. You're searching for your Eries or your Crushing Hammers, whatever you want, really. You've got a Goldeen in the active. You could put a skateboard or a rescue board on it, get it out of the active, put in a real attacker instead of flipping 2 Crushing Heads.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's kind of the direction. If this deck is going to see any success, I would kind of expect it to be more on that side rather than I'm going to hit 100 damage twice in a row and pray, I guess. I'm not super hyped on the deck. And one thing I think I've brought up maybe before the call, but something to think about is, right, this Thwacky has 2 retreat. Because I ran some test hands, and then halfway through I was like, I don't want to play this anymore. I just thought about this. So you've got 2 retreat, and it's only got this search if there's something with the festival lead ability in the active. Thwacky does not have festival lead. So if you boss this thing at any point, or like counter catch your Iono, they just have to raw draw out of that because they can't search for any card in their deck anymore, and they got to find a way to switch this thing out of the active to keep playing the game.
Yeah, I think that's definitely got to be the biggest issue with the deck, right? Because if you're going to run the Diplin, for example, you have just grass energies. And so you have to run switching cards, but you can't search for the switch, just as you mentioned, if I boss stall to reestablish something, right? Like, cool, you KO'd my Charizard, I don't have quite the follow-up I want. Okay, we're just going to boss a Thwacky or counter catch your Iono, see what happens, right? Buy my turns, be totally fine. One of the things that does have with control, as you mentioned, though, is DTE attackers do exist that would want like a Luxray, for example. So that gives you a way to retreat the Thwacky as well. And of course, you do have the issue of you have to get the DTE when you can't use Boom Boom Drum. It's such a great name because it got bossed into the active. But there's got some amount of synergy there of the energy for one of your best attackers is also the switch card, right? So maybe I'm not the person to build that deck. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to be trying to build that deck. Definitely seems fun. Maybe I'll play it to a league challenge one day. But I wouldn't be surprised if someone cracks a control version of it. I think the straight attacking one is just, it's a little bit too late. If you had it in this meta with Zard, yeah, it's great. I don't really want to play into a meta where they're just going to be destroying my bench.
Yeah, we kind of undersold Dragapult a little bit in that it is a good deck and it is going to be played. And I don't know how this deck is going to handle that much damage counter spread. Again, maybe someone will figure it out. I'm not that person because I cannot see how 100 HP bench sitter is going to handle 6 damage counters every single time, right?
Well, we did mention how hard it is to kind of get that attack, get those 2 energy. If I just flip double heads on my Goldeen, what are you doing?
So now we're talking, you got to take a Goldeen for the Dragapult matchup.
Yeah, play Goldeen, play the thing, play 4 Crushing Hammers. Something's got to work, right?
Let's go and jump into some of the trainers. There's still more cool Pokemon. Tatsugiri exists, Blissey exists, Greninja EX exists, Palafin exists, but we're gonna jump into the trainers because it doesn't have to be an 85-minute, thing. Let's try and keep it about an hour. Let's talk about my favorite. Sorry, there we go. My favorite supporter card in this one, which is I don't think it's the best one, but I think it's so cool as Carmine. So Carmine, discard your hand, draw 5, but you can use it going first on your first turn. I actually kind of hate that this card exists because everyone talks about Lugia. Yeah, sure, Lugia, whatever. I see this as a turbo big basic, now suddenly getting more turbo. Squawkabilly plus Carmine means you can go first and draw through 11 extra cards on your first turn to find dark patches, or I don't know, you're going to run Tinglu Koraidon and you can find your whatever you're looking for or something, right? I think this card just makes stuff so much more turbo, and it's an actual card you would want to use going first, unlike Beauty, which was a terrible card that never should have existed, because why did you even bother? Sell me down on Carmine not being a Turbo Deck's best friend.
Look, I think it's really good for that Lugia, like you mentioned, and that's kind of the key part where it fits in. I don't really know what other deck. Like I know the big deck, basic decks, obviously they love it,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't attack going first, and a lot of these big basic decks that want to go fast, like the Miraidon and stuff, they just want to go second anyway.
Mm-hmm.
They want to just swing as soon as they can. So I don't know how much it's really going to fit in there. I think it's definitely going to help out Lugia though, because that deck needs, like I said before, needs all the help it can to get going. And the card's not part of the next set, but there is one in the next set, which I think is going to be absolutely hilarious with the Carmine. And it's the that little new Petron that's like plus 5 damage counters for if it's in the active and your opponent's poisoned, it's plus 5 extra damage counters. So you can make some turbo going first turn 1 deck that sometimes donks people and is funny, like the Anti-Valiant.
That's just
But I don't think
rude.
Carmine's going to be as incredible outside of Lugia.
That's fair. When I read this card, I'm just seeing something that turbos through and just vomits all their cards in the discard pile. And don't ask me what that deck is yet. And maybe that's why it's fair and balanced, because it's not really a deck yet. But I think it's such a good ability on a card when they've clearly balanced the format around no supporters going first to make it fair. Do you want to jump into a trainer card of your choice?
Yeah. Well, we should probably talk about the A specs at some point. A bunch of new A
Sure.
specs for the trainer cards. And a lot of really impactful ones. I think the 2 big ones that stick out to me are the Unfair Stamp
Yeah.
and Scoop Up Cyclone, is it? Or
Yep.
Super Scoop Up?
Scoop Up Cyclone.
Scoop Up Cyclone. Yeah, I think those 2 really stick out. You mentioned before how important Turo is. You're saying every deck should run Turo. Maybe they don't need to. They just play it as an item. So that it picks up any one of your Pokemon. Doesn't have to be a basic, like Penny, and you get to keep all the cards to your hand as well. So you're not discarding those energy. You're not discarding tools. I think it's just a really interesting card, and there's a lot of space to work with it as well. On top of just being, it's just better Turo sometimes.
Yeah, it's kind of like it can't be overstated how good it is to get the energies and the tools and everything back, right? Like, in addition to being an item, is super cool. But I really like Scoop Up Cyclone as a card. I don't think it should be slept on. Everyone's like, yo, you junk hunt Magnezone, and I mean, sure. But it's a really good card, and I think it's one that you would always be happy playing in a deck. There's a lot of cards I guess you'd always be happy playing in a deck, but there's plenty of times you'd be like, all right, pick up my fish, pick up my Rotom, pick up my damage thing, and like suddenly you're ahead of the game by like a lot by pulling that off, right?
Yeah, you're just basically skipping a turn, and these decks are already wanting to run Turo anyway. So now you've just got it as an item, and that's great. And it doesn't, sometimes it's a bit sad when your ace spec isn't this like really cool, incredible, flashy thing that makes some insane combo. It's like, oh, I just healed my guy to full, benched back my Dragapult, use Zatu again with the energy that came from hand, attach that fire again, stick it back in the active. I just healed it for 200. Maybe that's just enough to win the game sometimes. I think the card is definitely going to be really strong, and it's going to pop up here and there in a number of decks.
And then you mentioned the unfair stamp. So I think this card is incredibly good. I'm really happy to see the Japanese results are not what Twitter thought it was going to be, which was this card breaks the game, blah, 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 game's over, whatever. But you're the Lost Zone player, currently a Lost Zone player. Does that unfair stamp scare you off of a deck like Lost Zone where you're like, all right, I'm going to spit innocently, turn 1, take this KO on a Charmander, and suddenly you get unfair stamp to 2 and just lose the game? Or do you think that's like, it'd be annoying, but I'm not actually afraid of people playing this thing?
Nah, you've taken the words out of my mouth. I am absolutely terrified of that card. As a Lost Zone lover, um, yeah, I just want to hit my cram turn 1, and I'm like, this is enough to get you out of the game, right? If I get Prime Catcher cram turn 1, knock out your only Charmander, I'm just winning this game. What are you doing? And then just go unfair stamp and I brick for 8 turns. So I'm pretty scared that card, if it becomes enough of the meta,
Mhm.
which it doesn't seem to be from the Japanese results, thank God. Yeah, it can just really like turn these big fast decks that attack going first, turn 2 going second, turn 1 going
Mhm.
second. It can just rip them out of the game. You put their hand back down to 2. I flower select. I don't find a chorus. Not doing anything. Same with like the Miraidons. You can just really, they'll get ahead. They'll get that attack turn 1, and you can search for this too, right?
Mhm.
It's like, yeah, it's a one off, but you're playing 4 Arven in a lot of these decks too. So you've basically got 5 outs to find your unfair stamp, and it draws you cards as well. Like, it's just great. I think it's a really great card. I don't want to be on the other side of it though.
Yeah, I think that's another thing, right? The drawing you cards is also incredibly good because you Arvin for it to just completely body your opponent playing whatever turbo deck. But I also get a fresh new hand of 5 at the end of doing my whole combo pieces, right? And that's pretty good. Like Shauna is not a great supporter card, but Shauna as an item would be really good. Like completely broken card, right? I think one that we mentioned it for Lugia, the legacy energy that we have to get to. So it is a rainbow energy and only once per game. I think that's the important caveat. But once per game, your opponent takes 1 fewer prize card for knocking out the Pokemon Legacy energies attached to. So it is a rainbow energy for Lugia. So they can use the Ogre Pawn, they can use Iron Hands, they can use insert thing here, right? And Iron Hands is now a single prizer with 230 HP. Is this actually the thing that makes Lugia scary? Or do you think this doesn't fix its issues?
I'm not gonna lie, I look at this card and I don't even read the line about where it you take 1 less prize. I'm not even thinking about that. I'm thinking about Lugia just smacking an Iron Hands into me, and that being the terrifying part.
Mhm.
I think it's, that's just your go-to A spec. Now people are like kind of between Master Ball or Prime Catcher or Hero's Cape or something. You're just playing this energy. You're not playing anything else. I don't think it fixes the problem of the deck being inconsistent. I don't know if anything's going to fix that without them like reprinting Evo Incense and Quick Ball, which please don't
No.
until Lugia's gone at least.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think you fix that issue, but I think it's going to make the deck way more popular because you've got all these fun, cool attackers. Maybe it reminds people of Lugia of old. And I think the deck is going to be really popular. Still a brick. Still, you're not going to play the game maybe 30-40% of the time. But when you do, you are winning. You are the best deck in the room. No one is stopping you.
Do you think this is something that can show up in other decks as well? Or do you think something like, let's go to Festival Grounds, right? You're attacking with your Diplins. Oh, you can make a Diplin a 0 prize Pokemon at some point, and that buys you that extra turn. Or is it just like, it doesn't really do enough for those decks versus Stamp or Prime Catcher or something like that? Like, does this spark joy in your heart for single prize decks?
Yeah, I haven't really thought about it too much in any other deck,
Mhm.
to be honest. At the end of the day, like taking 1 less prize is just an incredible effect. A lot of decks, they should probably at least, it's something to consider. I think the issue with it though is that there's a lot of special energy hate at the moment because of Lugia being good.
Mhm.
You've got Temple of Sinnoh, and a new card we haven't talked about as well is the Enhanced Hammer coming back. I do know that used to be an old card. But I think a lot of decks are going to take in one of these in some way to deal with Lugia. So you can't really be relying on that as your A spec. I think you want something a bit more impactful that can't just be countered by one random card in your opponent's deck.
Yeah, you've already mentioned the like, hey, you're already running Arvin in a lot of decks, which means you can easily play Enhanced Hammer to get rid of the Mist energy in Lugia, get rid of the Legacy energy, get rid of the whatever. So I'd say it's unfortunate, but actually it's probably a good thing. And I'm pretty sure that they were printed together or put in the same set, you know, on purpose, right? That, hey, your enhanced hammers are going to keep the legacy energy in check and keep it from being completely broken. I feel like it's a little too strong of word regardless, but taking one fewer prize is really good. Just next time you play some Pokemon games, everyone, pay attention to if I took one less prize card on any of my knockouts, would I have still won this game? And the way the game is currently designed, the answer is usually no.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely definitely a pretty good effect. You know, your opponent has 7 prizes now. That's a lot to get through. Um, another card I kind of want to talk about.
Please.
Is there any other aspects worth
Secret
talking
Box and
about?
Hyper
I'm
Aroma.
just
That's what I was going to ask. Are these anything beyond bulk in the current format or future current format?
look, I don't think Secret Box is that much of a card. Hyper Aroma is pretty interesting. I'm still more of a fan of going a little bit faster and trying to get that TM Evo.
Mm-hmm.
From what I've tested at least. I do know the Guardi list. That came second. I'm pretty sure ran Hyper Aroma.
Yep.
And that's, yeah, find 3 stage 1s from your deck. It's pretty good if you have a whole board of Raltzes and you just need to evolve them and start going. But I'm not super big on it. I think Guardi would probably prefer some other aspects, but definitely could pop up. And I think maybe we briefly mentioned it, but the survival brace.
Oh, that's
I'm
right.
sure there's some control player is going to break that. It's going to be great. It doesn't have that little asterisk next to it that says you can't recycle it. So if you Roseanne's backup, you're getting it back. Someone will figure something out.
Yeah, it's really a matter of do people pack their vacuums or not? And if they do, are they able to get Eerie or Misfortune Sister before you infinitely loop this card somehow?
Well, do they pack their vacuums or do they pack their jamming towers? Because I think jamming tower is actually a pretty interesting card. Stadium that turns off all tools
I did not think that's
on
what you were
both
going to
sides.
say.
No, I think it's really interesting, and
Uh-huh.
it might not be great, but I think I'm loving that they're printing this and also Kieran, which is the supporter that's like plus 30 damage, or you can switch,
Mhm.
because these non-Eeriable answers to control are just really important. I saw a lot of people complain about Eerie on Twitter. You know, it does suck when you get your one answer to control ripped. I played a control in the cup the other day, and they ripped my vacuum, and I was like, oh, okay, well I can't kill you guys anymore. That sucks. So I think having these answers that just can't get ripped from your hand, it's just really important. Um, and yeah, it's probably weaker than Lost Vacuum a lot of the time, but it's just good that it exists, right? It's nice to have these answers, and it's almost like future proofing in case maybe one of these decks just goes off and it's just too strong.
That is an interesting too, because if controlled lists get greedier, which some are currently kind of at right now of no stadium bumps, because no stadiums really hurt them, right? This card existing kind of makes them either commit spaces to stadiums or lets you punish if they don't, right? Because shutting off every single Forest Seal Stone, Bravery Charm, Defiance Vest, etc. That's a lot of their strategy right there, right?
That seems pretty good.
Now, it's also cool. Charizard decks, for example, right, are pretty greedy with their stadium bumps. They have the one of Vacuum and the one of Collapsed. Suddenly, the Arven for 4 Seal Stone does nothing, right? So there's other situations where early jamming tower against greedy lists definitely has potential to slow down certain things. Specifically, looking at Forest Seal Stone on that one, right?
Yeah, definitely. The amount of decks in the current format, and probably in the next, I would assume,
Mhm.
they're just like, I'm gonna Arven, I'm gonna Forest Sealstone, I'm gonna grab some cards. And if your Arven is just saying grab an item, that's not great. It's not great. And you know, TM Evo as well. You shut down that. You shut down a lot of things. More than you think about at first.
Another card that we do want to mention the control got some more weapons is Fable Flute. Not less so control, I guess, and more so Snorlax, but reveal the top five cards of your opponent's deck and put any number of basic Pokemon you find there onto your opponent's bench. So we're adding more RNG to Block Lax, right? Is this a real card?
Yep, this card is real. Unfortunately, I wish it wasn't. I think you know Blocklax. You kind of have to jam for it, and it sucks because I think Blocklax is a pretty interesting spot right now. Like we just saw Azul win. You know, he just won Stockholm with it. I
Mhm.
think it was Stockholm.
Yep.
You know, he just won. Interesting deck, counterplay to it. It's great. And now you're just throwing in this card that, like you said, adding more RNG, and they're just gonna jam 4 of them and just play them all out and be like, oh, I hope I hit a blue guy. Hope I hit that Manaphy or Greninja.
Yep.
And I think it just kind of takes the deck into a worse place. Like it's stronger, but it's just so much less healthy and interesting. And I kind of wish it wasn't a card. I wish there was like a better way of doing this. So yeah, a bit of a shame, but I think Blocklax is absolutely going to run it. I don't really see any other deck ever finding any use for this. I'm not, yeah, I'm not too sure. I haven't thought about it. I don't really see that, but yeah, definitely in Blocklax.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the current. It's like, all right, they're going to Misfortune Sisters, and if they hit multiple switching cards, well, you feel bad, right? They're going to hit the Ericas, usually out of nowhere, right? And then suddenly it's like, well, I didn't have time to Iono this thing to the bottom, or whatever, right? There's a lot of already small pieces of RNG that you can kind of control. And then they added this of like, well, I can't put them in my discard, my deck, or my hand. This is bad. This is potentially bad. Blocklax is not completely broken, but kind of scary. And of course, you did already mention the
Yeah, it's
Kieran, right? But yeah, please go.
yeah, yeah. Oh, the Kieran, yeah, is like a nice little answer to it as well. Got a switch that they can't get rid of with Misfortune Sisters or Eerie. But yeah, I think the other problem as well, like you said, right now you want to just Ionia your cards back into deck because if they're in the discard, they're not safe from Mantine.
Mhm.
If they're in your hand, they're not safe from Eric. And now you have no safe space for your guys that you don't want on the bench, unless you can fully bench out. They're just gonna play it. And I don't think this is something you can really fit into Pidgeot control either,
Mhm.
because you can't just play one of them, right? You can't just play one and hope the top five has it. You're playing four, and you're just smashing them all, and at some point you'll hit something.
Kieran is another card that we kind of already mentioned, but I do want to mention the plus 30 is so good. I think Charizard is currently underrepresented in Japanese results. I think the card is still good. Card's clearly still good. This is no one's questioning that. But I don't think Dragapult has completely killed Charizard, and I think Kieran is one of those cards that helps it. Extra switch, always good, right? But the plus 30 is just so good because Charizard was clearly designed to not hit the correct numbers. And now suddenly you're KOing Dragapult at 2 prize cards remaining for them, right? You're KOing Giratina V Star or whatever V Star, if Regidrago V Star is a real thing, at that 270 damage, right? That 3 prize cards taken. So I think this card is really the only thing Charizard gets, and probably the only thing Charizard really needs moving into the next format. Do you see this fitting into any other decks?
Yeah, I think any deck that's kind of scared of control, this is like an alternative to just playing more Turos or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You probably would prefer Turo for the most part though, but it's a nice option. But yeah, that 30 damage, it feels bad that it's on a supporter. You never want to be spending your supporter to deal 30 damage. But if that's enough to hit a breakpoint and take a KO, who cares? It's worth it. I think Zard probably is the main one that's going to see this though, because one, it cares about getting things out of the active in the case of control. And also, yeah, that 30 just fixes a lot of numbers. But maybe there's some other decks that just need 30 more damage, and that's all it needs. I think Dragapult maybe even needs that, right? 200. Like we've been saying, 230 is a great number. So now they just hit it.
That's true. This is suddenly a way to deal with an early Iron Hands that otherwise you might not have been able to deal with, right? Or you have to do this cheeky little, I'm going to hit it and hope you don't have a boss, and then I'm going to Alakazam or, whatever they're going to do. Gust around it and put the 3 back on it. It's a very quick, like, all right, I'm just going to get rid of you so I don't have to hope you don't have boss. I'm just going to know you don't have boss. Or boss does nothing, right?
Yeah, because I mean that's how the Miraidon deck kind of tries to win, right? You take your 2 with Iron Hands, and then you boss something else. You've taken 4. You just win from there.
Right? Because then you have Raichu and you're just like, oh, I've already vomited all my energies everywhere. I'm good to go.
Yep, and you've got your heavy baton. Yeah, you're just winning from there. So I think that's probably a potentially good option. But I think they'd rather that as a tool because A, it's searchable from Arven, and B, you don't have to spend your supporter, which you desperately need for actually setting up on dealing just 30 damage. But it could potentially be an option.
Tim, any last cards? I'll give you one last, if there's anything that we have not mentioned that you're like, oh yeah, this one should be a thing.
Yeah, well, we've been talking about control a little bit, so I think handheld fan. I think I haven't cracked it. I want to crack it. I keep trying. This card is gonna do something. I'm sure it'll show up somewhere in NAIC. Handheld fan, tool you stick on your Pokemon. I believe when they attack you
Mhm.
and you take damage, you get to move one of their energies to any of their bench Pokemon, so onto one of their useless guys, preferably, or maybe you just stack all your energy on one of their Pokemon. It gets countered by stuff like Turo or Scoop Up or Collapse, where they can get rid of that one Pokemon that has all the energy.
Or Jamming
But I think it's
Tower.
just super disruptive. Or Jamming Tower. But it's just a super disruptive card on a tool that you just stick on your active. And I definitely think there's some world where it's played. Like, people played Clorf in Control, Clorf EX, and this seems better than that.
That is true, because now suddenly I'm not even sure what a bigger single. Oh, your Ursaluna. Your Blood Moon Ursaluna has more HP than a Cloth. Your Blood Moon Ursaluna is a cloth because you have the handy circulator on it, right?
And it's attacking. It's doing things.
That's true too. It's going to smack you for 240 damage, and it's going to put your energy back in hand if you come to attack it for the next turn, right? So yeah, it's a cool card. It's a really cool card. And plus, obviously, it controls playing Arvin 4 of, because we mentioned earlier, Charm, Defiance, Force, Seal Stone, etc., right?
Yeah, I mean, just how you play the game.
Tim, if the people want more from you, where can they find you? And do you have any shout outs?
I don't really have any shout outs off the top of my head, but I was just thinking it's a real shame that I've been on the podcast now, because I'd usually listen to this on the train into the office, and I don't really want to listen to my own voice for an hour, so I'm gonna have to find something else for that. If people want to find more from me though, I'm at Tim Danklin on just about everything. Mainly use Twitter for the most part, but I am looking to do a bit more on potentially YouTube or Twitch when I get a bit more free time. So you can follow me there preemptively if you want.
Myself, Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube at mellow_magikarp. Be sure to rate and review the show. Be sure to check out table.village.com and use code mellow5 for 10% off your order of Twilight Masquerade. This has been another episode of the Lake of Rage podcast. We'll catch you all next week. Are you looking for sleeves? Of course you are. You're a Pokemon trading card game player like me. I recently got my hands on the Procyon Gaming dual spec sleeves, and I gotta say, I absolutely love them. I was actually kind of surprised by how much I liked them. So we've now partnered with the Champions Reserve to offer you 15% off of Procyon Gaming's new dual spec sleeves. And maybe you're saying, Mello, why would you want to pick these ones? Because I think first and foremost, they are indestructible. I had played with the Sentinels, their old formula, and those things just did not ever get nicks on the corners or anything like that. And now I've used the dual specs, and I gotta say, they are also just the most indestructible sleeves that I have seen or used so far. After shuffling up dozens of games hands, they have zero bent corners. They are slightly larger than the Sentinel, so the cards fit in perfectly. And my absolute favorite, they come in boxes of 70, so you don't have a ton of extra sleeves. You have just enough if somehow one of them were to ever break, although boy, you got to be a rough shuffler to do that. So check out the championsreserve.com, use code LAKE15 for 15% off an order of Procyon Gaming dual spec sleeves.